Jim is with the, there's your clicker right there, is head of the air protection branch of EPD. You can see all the stuff in the bios. I just want to tell you a little bit about EPD. This is one of those things where I kind of think about that old Ronald Reagan saying that goes something like, the two worst things you can hear is, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. I want to let you know that the Environmental Protection Division of DNR, they take care of making sure that our air is clean, our water is safe. Landfills do what they're supposed to, a number of different things, but they are truly an ally and a partner of Prescribed Farm. And we typically, and has for many years now, had EPD give a presentation, an update on the quality of air developments that are going on, and that's what we're going to do right now. And so please, everybody, if you would welcome Jim Boylan.
All right, thanks. Yeah, Georgia EPD really does appreciate the opportunity to be on the agenda every year and talk about air quality. In fact, I think this is my sixth time in a row speaking. In fact, if you were here last year, you heard me say last year was my last year, and that Steve Allison was going to take over my spot, but he moved to permitting, so you're stuck with me again for one more year. So you've got me this year, but I want to introduce Sean Taylor, is the head of our stationary source compliance program. He's actually going to be taking over for EPD's spot on the steering committee for the council. So that's Sean taking over. So we'll go ahead and jump into it. So basically, I'm going to be the big thing in air quality, and the thing that's could potentially influence prescribed burning is the EPA is going to be changing the PM 2.5 NAAQS, and they plan to lower it. So I'm basically going to be speaking about that today. So PM 2.5 or PM particulate matter is just very small particles in the air. They can be solid or liquid. They can be directly emitted, such as smoke from a prescribed fire or a wildfire. That's going to be elemental carbon and organic carbon, or it can be formed in the atmosphere through chemical reactions. And the reason we care about this is because it has impacts on the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system. So the current standards, we'll start out with what's currently on the books as of today. Actually, these have been the standards for the last 10 years that we've been meeting for the last 10 years. For PM 2.5, there are two standards. There's an annual standard, an annual National Ambient Air Quality Standard, or NAAQS, and that is the annual averaged over 3 years needs to be less than 12 micrograms per cubic meter. So that one's pretty straightforward. There's also a daily National Ambient Air Quality Standard. This one gets a little more tricky. This one is the 98th percentile of 24-hour daily averages, averaged over 3 years, needs to be less than 35 micrograms per cubic meter. And the 98th percentile gets a little tricky. If you measure every single day, 365 days out of the year, 98th percentile is the 8th highest value, which means you get 7 high values that you get to basically throw away and use the 8th highest value and then average the 8th highest value over 3 years and compare that to 35. However, if you don't monitor every day, if you monitor 1 in 3 days, that 98th percentile becomes your 3rd highest, so you only get to throw 2 days away. The daily standard is not the one we're really worried about with EPA lowering the standard. It's the annual standard, and I'll talk more about that. Also, there's the term called design value, and the design value for a metropolitan statistical area is based on the monitor with the highest 3-year concentration in the area. Also, the difference between a violation and an exceedance. A violation is when your design value is greater than the NAAQS. So I just talked about what the design value was. That involves 3 years worth of data. An exceedance is just a one-time just one time where your 24-hour value goes over 35 micrograms per cubic meter. And so what we have is you can have multiple exceedances and still be and still not have violations of the standard. And that's what we see here in Georgia year after year after year. We actually have many exceedances, but we have no violations. But what is EPA proposing to do? So Georgia EPD did submit comments. We submitted about 15 pages worth of comments. And some of the comments I'll talk about. And then when the final rule should come out later this year. Originally, they said October. I think October, it's not going to be October, but it could be by the end of this year. And once that standard comes out, that's when a bunch of things start happening. A lot of timelines start getting started. So this is what EPA has proposed. I said the current standard for the annual standard is 12 micrograms. They're proposing to lower it between 9 and 10 micrograms per cubic meter, and that's a pretty big drop from a percentage standpoint. For the daily standard I talked about, the 35 micrograms per cubic meter, they have proposed to retain that standard and not change it. And then for the PM10 standards and the secondary PM2.5 standards, they had proposed to keep those. So the only one EPA is proposing to lower is the annual standard from 12 to somewhere between 9 and 10. So once EPA does finally lower the standard, like I said, likely later this year, one of the first thing that happens is designations. So areas will get designated as attainment or non-attainment. That does not happen immediately. There's a 2-year process to the designations. The first year is the state of Georgia will actually recommend which areas should be designated attainment or non-attainment based on the 5 factors listed below, air quality being the most important. If you have any monitor that is measuring air concentrations that are above the standard, that county at a minimum will be non-attainment, but also if there's emissions in nearby counties contributing to non-attainment, those counties will also be brought into non-attainment. They also look at meteorology, topography, and boundaries. The data that will likely be used for the Georgia EPD recommendations is 2021 to 2023, which will be the most recent data at the time. So we're still in 2023, so we don't know what number this will be, but we do know what 2021 and 2022 are. I'll talk about that. Once we submit our recommendations 1 year after the standard is set, EPA has another year to do the final designations. And by the time they do their designations, a new year worth of data will be available. So the EPA designations will be likely based on 2022, 2023, and 2024 data. And that would be basically in late 2025 when that comes out. So state implementation plans, these are required for any area that is designated non-attainment. So if an area is designated non-attainment, Georgia EPD has to put together a state implementation plan that has a bunch of stuff in it. But the big thing that's in it is a control strategy. It's basically our plan to basically describe how this non-attainment area is going to come back into attainment. It's due 18 months after the effective date of the designations. So the designations are going to say, let's be 2 years out from now. Then we basically have 1.5 years to get our plan turned into EPA. The control strategies would likely include additional controls on industrial sources and additional restrictions on prescribed burning. So nobody wants a non-attainment area. Nobody, including us. So I'm going to go into trends and see what our data looks like here in Georgia. So this is the daily standard. The red line at the top is the 35 micrograms. That's the one EPA is not proposing to change that. So if it stays at 35, you can see that we're in really good shape. These are the highest values in each of our MSAs. So if an MSA has multiple monitors, this is the highest value in each MSA. So you can see they're all well below 30. So we're not really worried about the daily standard. However, we are worried about the annual standard. So again, the red line at the top is the 12 micrograms per cubic meter. You can see that over the last 10 years, all the monitors have been well below the 12 micrograms. The red dotted lines, there's one for 9 micrograms and one for 10 micrograms. And what you can see is, looking at the most recent data, there's two locations that are based on the most recent data are above 10 micrograms. That's the Augusta area at 10.4 and Sandersville area at 10.2. In addition, we have a whole bunch of areas that are in between 9 to 10. So if EPA was to set the standard at 9 micrograms, more than half the state would be in non-attainment. This is the same picture or the same data, just in a map. Again, we have Augusta and Sandersville in red that are above 10. We have a number of areas in yellow that are above 9, and then we have areas in green that are below 9. So it looks pretty bad. However, there is some issue with the data I'm going to talk about. So some of our monitors are federal reference method monitors, and some of our monitors are federal equivalency monitors. So the FRM monitors are the traditional monitors where you collect data, you collect air on a filter for 24 hours. Someone goes and physically gets the filter, takes it to a lab. In fact, we mail our filters away to a lab in another state where they're measured, and then we get a value. Maybe 2 months later, we find out what the 24-hour value was for that day. That's the way PM 2.5 measurements have been done for the last 20 years. But recently, EPA has come up with federal equivalency method, which is a continuous measurement. And basically, you get a continuous measurement. You get hourly values instead of a 24-hour block. One value, you get hour-by-hour values. You get it immediately. You don't need a person to go out to the site, and you don't need a lab. So it's much cheaper to run. So you get the high-resolution data immediately, which is really, really good. The problem is, as you can see on this graph, is that the FEM values are typically much higher than the FRM values. And that's a problem because we've started deploying a lot of the FEMs. So there's this high bias issue, and the high bias can be as high as at least 1 microgram to 2 micrograms per cubic meter on an annual average, which is a pretty big deal. What EPA has told us, and they haven't put this in writing yet, is that we will be allowed to account for this bias when we do our designations. So these numbers back here, these are uncorrected. These have not been corrected for this bias. We actually, as part of our comments on the rule, actually went through and came up with an algorithm that would correct for the bias, for this bias. And when we correct for the bias, the numbers look much more promising. So there are still a couple of areas that are above 9, Atlanta being the highest monitor after the bias correction at 9.4, and that is our roadside monitor right alongside of I-75 / I-85 right out on the Georgia Tech campus. You know, and a lot of that is going to be due to the diesel emissions from the trucks coming through. But you can see that most of the state is now going to be below 9, which the low EPA proposed 9 to 10. So if we are able to make these corrections, there's a good chance, and the standard's 10, we may not have any non-attainment areas. If the standard's 9.5, no non-attainment areas. If the standard's 9, we may possibly have some non-attainment areas. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about are exceptional events. And I've talked about this in the past. Each time we have an exceedance of the standard, which means each time a monitor measures greater than 35 micrograms per cubic meter, and we get a fair amount of those, we write a report. And the report is written, we look at some modeling, some high split back trajectory modeling, we look at emissions, we look at time series, we look at a bunch of things, and we basically try to figure out why that exceedance occurred. Why did we have an exceedance? So this is a summary down at the bottom of our exceedances for the last 4 years. And what you can see is that wildfires and prescribed fires are the biggest contributor to our exceedances. You can see the super high number in 2023, almost a lot of those came from the Canadian wildfires. Actually, for one of the days, we had every monitor in the state was an exceedance because of the Canadian wildfires. But what we see is we have Saharan dust, fireworks, and others. So basically, every exceedance since 2020 have been caused by events that are eligible for exclusion under the exceptional events rule. So what the exceptional events rule says is that if EPA concurs that it's an exceptional event, that the data can be excluded from the design value calculations that are used for comparison to the NACs and also used in the designations. So not only will we be applying this bias correction factor, we can also go in and look for these exceptional events, write a demonstration, and if EPA agrees with it, that data can be removed from the calculation and our design value can be even lower. So we've been working on a template to do this because EPA does have guidance on exceptional events for prescribed fires. There's one specifically for that. So we're actually working on it in a template so we can quickly develop exceptional event demonstrations for prescribed fires. We have selected an example from 2020. We want to use the information from our exceedance reports. I said every time we have an exceedance, we write a very detailed report. It's got satellite imagery, it has modeling, it has permit information from Georgia Forestry Commission. And so we write those reports anyway. We'll be able to quickly pull information from that to write these exceptional event reports. And then we picked one from Albany from March 29th of 2020. So I'll slow a couple of things from that. But these are the required elements: a conceptual model, clear causal relationship, not reasonably controllable, human activity unlikely to recur, and public comments. And although 3 and 4 doesn't sound like it could apply to prescribed fires, the EPA guidance at the bottom here actually has talked about how we can apply those by using things such as the natural reoccurrence of the wildfire interval in lieu of some of these elements. So conceptual model, we talk about our open burning rules, the summer burn ban, we talk about that. We talk about Georgia's smoke management plan and our MOU with EPD, Wildlife Resource Division, and Georgia Forestry Commission. This is the example from Albany. The plot on the left is the day before the exceedance. The one on the right in red is the day of the exceedance. And this is the time series. So we're looking at the red line here. This is the exceedance. The exceedance occurred on the 29th, but what we can see is that the exceedance on the 29th was partially caused by fires on the 28th, because you can see the high values in red crossing through midnight. In the early hour mornings of the 29th, you have the high values. So fire on the day before contributed to the exceedance. And then you can see at the very end, the monitor going up again. So that is likely from a fire from the 29th. So it's a combination of smoke from the day before and then smoke from a fire on the day of that led to this exceedance. This is high split back trajectory modeling. We can actually follow the parcels of air backwards in time to see where they came from. Each one of these lines is a value that was over 35 micrograms for that hour. So each one of these lines represents an hour. The orange represents the day before, the red is the day of. The orange marks on the graph, the triangles and squares are fires, prescribed fires, and the red ones are from the day of. And what we can see, according to this, it looks like, you know, some of the fires directly south of Albany were responsible. This is time series. One of the things the guidance says is to look at the burn season average, which is the green line at the bottom. That's typically what the monitor reads. It's typically about 10 micrograms during the burn ban season. And then we look at the day before, the day after, and the day of. So the day of the exceedance is the red. You see the red line there. Okay, so this is an animation from satellite. And what you're going to see are, you see the clouds going this way. But if you look, you can actually see the smoke plumes going perpendicular to the clouds. And you can actually see the smoke plumes basically crashing right into the Albany monitor. So this is, you know, evidence for us in our exceptional events report that the prescribed fires were responsible for the exceedance, showing that clear causal linkage. And it's hard to tell, and we'll watch it one more time. So you see the clouds coming down. But you'll see the smoke plumes going opposite, which are down at the surface. And then you see the smoke plume going right into the Albany monitor. So that's the one on the day of. Okay. So this is the same slide I showed before. Our model showed that the plume was coming from directly south of Albany, but we saw in the satellite that it was actually the fires to the southwest that was actually basically providing the smoke to help with the exceedance. And it's not just one fire or two fires; it's a whole bunch of fires in that general area. So for this exception, so no one has ever done an exceptional event for prescribed fires before in the entire country. We plan to do them. That's why we're building this template to get ready when the standard comes out. We're going to be ready to start writing exceptional events for prescribed fires. We could be the first one to turn one in and have one approved. So that's why we're getting this template ready. We've been working on it for the last couple of months. We're going to be sharing it with Georgia Forestry Commission. We've already been working with Ken Parker to get some feedback, but we're going to be sharing it with him soon. Once we get feedback from him, we're going to share it with EPA Region 4, U.S. Forest Service, and our neighboring states to get their feedback. And we plan to have this ready to go by the end of the year, which should be about when the standard comes out, so that we're ready to write these exceptional events and get the data so it doesn't count against us as we're doing our recommendations. And that's my contact information. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Any questions?
If it's been under 12 for the last 10 plus years, what's the science for dropping it to 10? I mean, if 12 was a bad number, why are we been using, we're big on 12, why do they want to drop it to 10?
So all of the standards are based on their health-based standards. The standard used to be 15 at one point. Then it was dropped to 12, and now it's getting dropped again. And what happens is new science comes along, and the new science is looked at. There's new studies, more detailed studies, and things like that. And basically, what the science is showing is that 12 is not protective. But something lower is, and there's a lot of debate, whether it should be, 11 or 10, 9 or 8. Some of the KSAC members that give comments to EPA was saying as low as 8, which to me, I've looked at the science. It doesn't, to me, the science does not support 8 or 9, maybe 10, somewhere between 10 and 11 is where I see the science supporting a lower number, but definitely not. I don't see anything below 10 being supported by the science.
Okay, one more question.
More of a comment to support Jim. Just to let you know that, we're Georgia Forest Commission working very closely with EPD. I tell you, a year ago, we met with other southern states about salt management. And when this was brought up, it was like crickets. Other southern states were not hardly even looking. We were way ahead. And so just to let you know, we're recognized actually at being leaps and bounds ahead of what other states are doing for smoke management and trying to address this problem. So, be assured, we are the leaders in the country when it comes to, as Jim said, national rules are very important. And so we jumped on it and said, well, hey, let's let Georgia be the ones that got to do this, because if we can take the information that Georgia Forest Commission has for our permitting process, take the information that Jim is providing when there is exceedance, and put that together, you know what? Hey, all these other states can have to follow what we're doing because we're the ones to put it out there. You know what? Why don't we create something if we're already pulling that data together? So being recognized nationally as, we're leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else in this process. So just want to let you know that, we're taking this seriously, and we're looking at it, and we're trying to do everything that we can to protect the tri-fire state.
Thank you, Jim.
You mentioned that perhaps size shaded 10 would be an appropriate number. Where do you get the information? What type of study is there studies? Are they mechanistic? Are they, do they look at clinical, manifestations, based on exposure? What is the size?
Yep. So the process for EPA to evaluate a new standard is they put together what is called an integrated science assessment, which is the first document that they put together that documents all of the peer-reviewed scientific literature that is out there. The second document is the policy assessment, and that's where they basically look at the science and come up with policy recommendations. The biggest drivers here are epidemiological studies is one big one, and human clinical studies is the second one. They sometimes use animal toxicology studies to basically prove biological pathways, but typically those are at much higher concentrations. But it's really the epi studies and the human clinical studies. And it's there's been a lot of new epi studies over the last 10 years that has basically provided a lot of evidence that 12 is not safe with it, and it has to be with an adequate margin of safety is what is required by the Clean Air Act. So it's really the epi studies and then the human clinical studies. Yes. Mhm.
All right, we're gonna let that one be the last question because we're a little bit.
Just out of curiosity, are you aware of daily log complaints against prescribed fire that are burning the people? 1-800 complain about it?
So Sean, do you get any complaints about prescribed burning? Sean is actually in charge of our compliance program. So complaints usually go to his program. I don't think we get a whole lot on prescribed fire.
I haven't heard of any, but we also have 6 district offices that get complaints, so they may have received some. Most of the complaints that I see about burning is like their neighbor burning leaves next door, not prescribed.
Yeah, so the districts actually might get more complaints, but Sean and I are not aware of any. I mean, I haven't heard of any complaints myself, so. I think you guys are doing a great job, so.
Thank you, Jim. And if anybody has any questions that didn't get answered, Jim's gonna be here for the rest of the day. We're gonna take a break here in just a second. Yeah, round of applause, please.